Buenas tardes. Vamos a...
Hello, good afternoon. We're going to start with this second panel, which is so relevant to all of us for the energy transition in our countries. Now we're going to be talking about green hydrogen and its byproducts as an engine for economic development. In this panel we have Mr. Christian Gischler as a moderator. Mr. Christian Gischler has more than 20 years of experience in the energy and environment sectors in Latin America and the Caribbean. He is currently leading the IDB's efforts in matters of green products and the decarbonization of the heavy industry. He is a big promoter of the use of climate funds such as the Green Climate Fund, the Clean Technology Fund and the World Environment Fund. Gischler has designed, structured and leveraged and executed several financial instruments to promote energy and sustainable infrastructure for over 3.8 billion in Latin America. Before working at the IDB, he was a consultant for the National Environment Committee in Chile, as well as in the private sector, for energy efficiency in the mining sector, and in transportation emissions, heavy transportation emissions control, renewable energies and atmospheric pollution control. Mr. Gischler is a civil and chemical engineer and a biotechnology engineer of the University of Chile. He has a master's degree in environmental science and sustainable infrastructure from the Royal Institute of Sweden. So without further ado, our moderator has the floor now. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to Olare for this kind invitation. And we will start with a panel that is, in a way, a continuation of the panel that we had earlier today. And I will introduce them as they appear seated before me. To my left, I have Paul Lucchese from the International Energy Agency. Further to the left, we have Claudia Ilting from GIZ, Chile. To her left, we have João Pedro Bastos from the consulting company PCR. To his left, we have Marcos Kulga from H2 Chile. And last but not least, I have my colleague Janina Franco from the World Bank. So, today we will talk about green hydrogen and its byproducts, and we will talk about what was discussed in the previous panel, which wrapped up with a very interesting question, which was, who's going to pay and how are you going to pay for this transformation? So in order to answer that question, the first thing that we need to do is to address the gaps that exist as part of this transformation. And then we will talk about the opportunities. So the first round is going to be precisely on the gaps, and I'm going to start with my colleague from the World Bank, Janina. I think that one of the biggest gaps is the financial issue, which is, of course, not the only one, but definitely a big one. In other countries, we have subsidies by the states. For example, in the US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act that helps a great deal these hydrogen projects to come to light. We have H2 Global in Europe, which also promotes these projects. But before we talk about the opportunities, let us talk about the funding gaps. So, Janina, what is being done at the World Bank in this sense Can you please tell us a bit about the gaps that you have identified and how you have tried to overcome them? Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Olade, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I think that I've seen many of you before, and we have already talked about green hydrogen and how we are revolutionizing the industry and how funding is a key aspect. I think that nowadays, at the World Bank, we are conducting a funding study for green hydrogen where I think that there are two interesting things. Looking at the global context and trying to understand where the projects nowadays lie, we know that that's a big part, and we have also seen the cost of we have tried to come clean in terms of the costs of green hydrogen, being rigorous and systematic and taking a look at costs in terms of projects as refined as we can. And what we have come to notice is that most of these projects, especially in emerging and developing countries, are at a standstill after they reach the feasibility and pre-feasibility stages. Then they do all the engineering part, and you can see it in a plot where then you do the detailed engineering, and then those projects that in fact reach the final investment decision stage account for only 7% of all the several million projects that have been announced in emerging countries and even China. And this is very low compared to the OECD countries. So these are distributed in 20 projects, out of which 17 comprise a 1 to 8 megawatt size, and 3-4 are above 100 megawatts. So allowing this industry to get to a scale that we believe is significant, well, this is the main gap that we are observing, that it's really difficult to get to this final investment stage after you conduct the feasibility studies. What this study does is it considers all the projections of the International Energy Agency as well as IRENA, and we've seen that we need to reach 40 million tons. We've got a rule of thumb whereby we have defined that per million tons of green hydrogen that are produced, we will need 10 kilowatts of electrolyzers, and this needs 20 gigawatts of renewable energies, which implies $30 million of investment. That is the rule of thumb that we are following: 1, 10, 20, 30. And just to give an overview on the scale, in 2022 only $6 billion were invested. Therefore, the gap is huge. And if you put it in context, okay, how do we move the industry forward? Because there are no fiscal resources that can bridge that gap. So what we need to do, and this is what we're doing as an institution, but also together with the IDB and AIB and other multilateral bodies, is to use the money from these multilaterals, which is relatively concessional, in a very clever way, so as to lower the costs while mitigating the risks, so that the private banking sector and the lenders will have enough support in these projects. Hydrogen projects have a certain uncertainty, and we have no track record on this technology. So what we are observing is what we saw in Chile, for example, the facility launched by Corfu. Well, it uses a system of blended finance and project finance instruments, which are reserve accounts for debt and liquidity to mitigate the risks of commercial banks, so that their credit committees feel that the project has enough of a buffer to approve these projects. That's just one example, but we're also dealing with other shared infrastructure projects in Brazil, where we're going to support funding in different investments. And we have another project in India of $1 billion, which is basically to promote policies that will accelerate the boom of this technology, policies that will also lower production costs, and policies that will also reduce the manufacturing costs for electrolyzers so that this reaches the scale that is truthfully needed. We're also seeing how to foster demand, especially in some sectors such as fertilizers and ammonia, so that we can boost the industry. That is as much as I wanted to share to begin with. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janina, and I think that you have hit the nail in the head. I think that funding is an overwhelmingly large issue. As Janina was saying, to produce 1,000 tons of hydrogen, we are talking in the dozens of millions of dollars so that we can articulate that amount of hydrogen. So, of course, this places a number of barriers, but a number of opportunities as well, which we will be addressing in a minute, maybe after this first round. Marcos, in your experience as president at H2 Chile, if you could refer to these barriers, perhaps institutional or regulatory barriers, infrastructure barriers as well, that you have seen to make up the bottleneck still in Chile, and if you want you can expand it to the rest of Latin America, be my guest in that case. But what is your experience at a national level, and what do you think is the road that we need to go in order to overcome these barriers?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Let me tell you that we have the president of our association over there. I'm just an executive director here, so the big name is over there. So in order to continue with this conversation, Hans talked about the time to market, but I think that it's critical to have time to volume, what she said. And I think it's something very relevant to implement all these pilot programs. I think that pilots and small projects it's crucial to carry them out. It's important that we do that quickly and also in the right scale and volume. But we can discuss that in the next round of questions. Then when it comes to barriers, we have several, and we are doing all these because we are running out of time. Basically, we have no time because we have a climate crisis that we are all experiencing. So basically, we have so many things, so many reasons to go over that barrier. It's like when you're creating a new industry. This was not invented by me. It's like removing a ship from the beach. And once it's in the water, it's way easier. And the same happens here. It takes a lot of effort at the beginning. So when working, this applies to the market in Chile, but can also be applied to the rest of the markets. I think infrastructure is fundamental. I think that we need to have shared infrastructure, and people are talking about infrastructure system or strategic infrastructure systems, because we don't need to have one port for all. We need to include other kind of ports with different infrastructures. In the case of Chile, we have two different situations that are completely different. The northern part of the country that already has an industry, and the most important one is the mining industry, where we have feasibility, road infrastructure, ports. We even have a port from which we import ammonia, and that is the main input, the main source or raw material they use for explosives in the mining sector. And this was also mentioned by Hans about this time to market and the possibility of retrofit existing structures. And in that port, instead of importing, being able to export. In the case of Magallanes, we don't have infrastructure. We only have two ports, two companies, ENAP, that has different types of infrastructure, and EVA, that is the port industry. In fact, that was the port through which we exported the first HIF liters. The first case is interesting because it's a public company and it has the opportunity of reinventing itself for what's coming in the future. So it may be from being the main oil company in Chile to become maybe a green energy company or an infrastructure provider. And we have interesting projects in that area where we have signed the first agreement with the private sector so that ENAP can gather in a way all these private companies and get resources because they don't have their own resources. And by doing this, they will be able to lead this process. So Magallanes is starting with the existing infrastructure in Laredo or Gregorio that is more closely connected to investment, and we should remember that infrastructure at the beginning will be used to receive all these components, and we're talking about multiple components in a very short period of time, and that requires road infrastructure or even the escorts for this. In the case of Chile, Carabineros. So I would say that in that case we have a significant gap that we need to bridge, and that includes several designs. We will also have private companies creating their own ports, but they will be creating these strategic port systems. So these companies will be able to use these ports with different business models. They will pay for the service, and then they will have landlord systems in which you can charge a specific fee for the use of ports or electricity systems. The other gap that we have in the country because in Chile we have cheap renewable energy, but what we need to have is to have the ability of implementing projects quickly. We need to have all the permits, and that takes a lot of time, all the things that you have to go through so that you can finally implement these projects. We have two kinds of permits, and that happens in several countries. We have the sectoral permits that we sometimes forget about them, and there are a lot, and the Ministry of Economy is in charge of that. They are studying the way in which they can accelerate those processes, and now they're working on 3 specific permits, and this can be basically maritime concessions that today are taking way too long. It's like 10 years to have a maritime concession. That takes 10 years. Imagine. Those times in the climate change crisis that we are facing, those are impossible. So all these sectoral permits and 3 specific permits that had to do with maritime concession, right to waterways. We have more than 45 agencies that study all these topics concerned and related to waters. And then we have national monuments, and they are in a way connected with native populations. Imagine if you start with a project and you find some of the remains of these civilizations. Another group of permits that is important has to do with environmental impact studies. It is fundamental to see what we can do while we change all these processes. And we have created some guides, because there are so many components that guides have been written for the different components of these processes. And in a way, I think that allowed us to start working until we have a law that is the law that deals with environmental impact. We have a group for sectoral permits and another one for environmental permits. And I could say that other countries can see what Chile is doing. We started working on this, we were pioneers, but then it took us so long that now other countries are getting to the same stage where we are. Thank you very much for that. I think that infrastructure is key, and I think we need to solve that problem. We need to work with ports issues, pipelines, and also with the electric components. And now we have an expert right here, João from PCR. What about the gaps that you see in order to transport all this electricity? Which are the gaps that you have identified so far? Okay, so first of all, good afternoon everyone, thanks for having me. So at PCR we have been working in different places. We work with certifications. We also work with regulations or regulatory complements in Brazil and in other countries, but more specifically something that we have been working on is the analysis of energy transition and try to model electric systems for the long term. We have been working for the World Bank with the energy transition in Brazil, and hydrogen being a very important actor. In the case of Peru, we're working with the IDB, the Ministry of Engineering and Mining in Peru. We're also working with CAF for some expansion plans and energy transition for the 18 member states. So what we've been doing and the conclusions that we have reached is that it is necessary, and I think that many people talk here about the need for change. So they mention 1,000 of tons and 20 gigas of renewable energy, but it is important to realize which are the needs of each country. If they want to reach 1,000 gigas, then how to optimize energies to provide or to reach those results. So we need to take into account offer and demand and try to see where the location for hydrogen could be, whether there are natural resources available or not, whether these resources can be optimized, and which would be the mix of technologies for each system, for each specific situation. And that is what we have been working on to optimize. Maybe it's not 1,000. Sometimes you can turn a 10 into a 9, or 20 should be 18, I know, small changes. So we're trying to find a way of optimizing the situation in each country through quantitative modeling. We have been working with different tools developed by PCR to model electric systems, and there try to identify the investment needs, the generation needs, and where to place all this new generation of technologies. Those are studies being carried out. Some of them, for instance, the study of the World Bank is ready, but we need to optimize several aspects. And these figures are very important, but depending on the reality of each country, we can reach optimum points. And we also need to analyze which is possible to decarbonize in each country, what can be exported, and all the infrastructure of the country. It's also important. Thank you, João. So we'll have to work in all the efficiency processes, in all the electric systems, so that we can reduce costs. And I think it was in the previous panel that they mentioned that in fact in Latin America it's going to be very hard for us to have a process similar to IRA or H2 Global. We will have to do something different, and that would be through different efficiencies that are connected that will allow us to reduce costs and in a way to improve values for hydrogen, also for the exploitation. So we can talk about the financial gaps, regulatory gaps, infrastructure gaps, and now let's talk about gaps when it comes to the community and the community perception of all this, the impacts that it may have on the communities. And for that, Claudia will tell us a little bit about this environmental social component that is linked to clean hydrogen. Thank you very much for that question. As you mentioned in the previous panel, we also talked about the byproducts. I really call my attention because we talk about hydrogen and we know that we cannot talk only about hydrogen and the great potential and how those byproducts can be used as an engine for economic development. And one of the advantages mentioned is high quality jobs. It creates new job opportunities, and that will also be a development for the economy. And in order to benefit from these high quality jobs, we need to train people so that they can make the most of these job opportunities. From the International and the German Agency for International Cooperation, this is one of the areas in which we are working. We are carrying out several technical surveys, and also we have multi-sectoral exchanges, and we're also working in training opportunities. This is going to be very important for the development of the economies of different countries. And for that, we need to create cooperation with the academia. We need engineers. We have university training, but also we need to work on professional development, working together with different companies so that we can understand the profiles required by companies that are implementing these projects. It will be important to work on continuous training. Technologies are constantly developing, and we need to continue working with these new technologies. And something that you mentioned, Christian, is we need to raise awareness so that civil society understands this. Talking to people that are not working with hydrogen all day long as we are, we know and we are aware of the prejudice against this topic. So we need to work with the civil society and the communities. It will be important to provide training or set up awareness programs and campaigns for the rest of the civil society. I think that with all these we can create a labor force that is trained for the production of hydrogen and to work on the value chain and its byproducts. That is a pretty complex process and it needs a lot of very well trained people.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Of course, training is a huge issue, in particular in those countries where some jobs will tend to disappear and that will be replaced with other jobs that contribute to this value chain. And of course, a key aspect which is the retooling and training and repurposing of people's jobs. Paul, now I'm going to switch to English. Let's address your question in English.
What are the aspects that you think are important in terms of collaboration between the diverse multilaterals and how that cooperation can be used on a way that we can really boost the hydrogen in Latin America?
Muchas gracias. Disculpe si hablaré en inglés, tal vez la próxima vez en español. International collaboration is very important. Why? You know, if we want to reach the net zero by 2050 at the world level, we need to combine, of course, all technologies we know, renewables, nuclear, CCS, electrification, everything. But it's not enough. Of course, we need to invest a lot. We need to accelerate the level of investment. We need to also take care of the capacity building, of course, but we need two more things. First, we need to invest in R&D and innovation. I don't speak today on that because it's one of my favorite topics. I am working at a research institute. But the second thing is international collaboration. Even you combine all the things before, if you have not international collaboration, you will delay, you will shift the energy transition. According to a very interesting studies published in 2021, for 40 years, you will reach net zero in 2090. Very interesting study. Why we need international collaboration? For many reasons. Maybe later I will speak about code and standards, but before there is other reason. First, it's a way to accelerate the decrease of cost of technologies. For example, of course, in the developed countries, you have many deployment of technologies today, and the cost is decreasing. But if you are considering the global level, you need also to deploy in a lot of countries where, for example, the cost of capital is high, because there is a big risk in terms of countries. So, for example, as the World Bank try to do is to de-risk this type of investment and to decrease the cost of technologies for all countries. So it's a first reason. Second reason, we have to share much more than today the knowledge, sharing knowledge, and exchange best practice. For example, in the case of hydrogen, you know there is an idea of hydrogen valleys, and this type of ideas is shared through the mission innovation platform in order to transfer this idea from the developed countries to the less developed countries. So it's another reason we need international collaboration. Of course, international collaboration is key for R&D and innovation. We have to share, of course, taking into account the intellectual property issues, but it's very important. And technology transfer is very important things. We spoke about international assistance and finance, of course, economy of scale, and the coordination of deployment of infrastructure. And last but not least, the coordination for establishing new codes and standards and certification, but maybe it will be a second part of the question. No, I will give some example maybe later if you want.
Sure, thank you, Paul. Janina.
Janina, how do you move from the gap to opportunity in financial matters? Oh, that's an easy question. I think that depending on the country we have different options, but again what we are doing together with this facility in Chile, where we're trying to really assess the risks of technology. So at this stage, just like any other project, we are in a stage in which we need to save the project. We need to have the guarantees that will address those performance issues that are no longer temporary, but rather structural. But on top of funding, there are policies and regulations that can promote local demand, that can... You cannot put all your eggs in the exportation basket. This needs to go in hand with the local demand so that you have an off-ticker in that, so that projects can be affordable. You need to reduce production costs, but also you need to worry about how to increase demand, which I think would really help bridge that gap. And another issue, and I don't know if I want to delve into this, but just to promote that local demand and to deal with that, the people, the community need to perceive a benefit of all this, because otherwise you're going to have some reluctance by the communities and licensing issues. So maybe that is for someone else to address, but it's yet another issue. Thank you. Thank you, Janina, and this is definitely going along the way of trying to maximize winners, minimize losers. And this means looking for new winners that were perhaps not that obvious in other sectors or other opportunities. Here we need to truly find a way to make populations that have been marginalized, that did not have this opportunity, now will have infrastructure, they will have access to sanitized, clean water, they will have access to large amounts of energy. But we need for everyone to have access to this opportunity, because otherwise what you said will happen. If there is an opportunity but the communities are not reaping the benefits, then you will have a problem, and that is something to definitely address. On the funding side of things, we're talking about huge amounts of investments, and we need to make a big effort to show investors outside Latin America that this is the place to invest. And that, as you said, it's not just a matter of exporting products, which we all agree will be beneficial. But apart from that, we need to incentivize local demand, and local demand is going to happen mainly in two sectors: heavy industry and heavy transportation. And we will need to build those alliances so that they use these products. Marcos, you were talking about pilots, and you said that you wanted to elaborate on that topic in the second intervention. So what opportunities do you see in terms of infrastructure in order to develop these opportunities? Okay, I really liked the question that was asked in the previous panel, which was, who's going to pay for this? And I think that's a key aspect. By understanding that when we are talking about a new industry from the point of view of production, because not from the point of view of use, well, we need to take that boat off the beach, and the best way to do it is structurally. I think that no country of ours will be able to compete with the incentives and benefits that you have in the north, but we know that it's in the south where you have the advantage of renewables. So I think that the first thing to make this happen is the structural thing, which we have been discussing so far, that has to be with agile permits, which doesn't mean that they need to be necessarily less rigorous, but we talked about certifications, we talked about infrastructure, we talked about funding, and I think that's very important to highlight, in the sense that in the south, what we need to change is structural, and those are the efforts that are being made. And there are some very interesting mechanisms. I think that large-scale or giga-scale projects are the ones that will generate big resources, but it's important to start with local demand. And we need to be creative to do this. We need to find creative ways to promote local demand. In the case of Chile, and I don't know if, as we say, you're gonna get what I'm saying or not, but a possibility that we have always seen as a promoter is the mining industry in Chile. Mining is a large-scale industry in Chile. We need to replace diesel for scope 1 and 3, which are trucks, large trucks, 300-ton trucks that use thousands of liters of diesel on a daily basis. If we could move that to some green fuel, that would be very interesting. And of course, ammonia nitrate for explosives, which are scope 3, would also be very interesting. And what I would love to see is that a company like Codelco, which is the largest public mining company in the world, could generate mechanisms perhaps with other mining companies like H2 Global.
Un cobre verde.
Why not try to see at an early stage that you can sell green copper, because that is the response for this energy transition, otherwise it wouldn't be green copper. Well, you could make donations from the private world with matchings in the public world and create an H2 Global in the mining industry. For Chile, agriculture, just like many other countries in the region, if we can have an internal ammonia production for fertilizers, for instance, we could again be looking at industries that could promote local demand. Also, heavy transportation in Chile. We have all our roads are collapsed all the time with trucks. So hydrogen and its byproducts could maybe change autonomy and allow for long distance transportation. Also, Walmart, for example, this off-road transport that doesn't have to do with this maybe crane transport. We're talking about a fleet of 200 cranes that have that we see that they have a very spectacular level of autonomy, and therefore they need to be charged all the time, perhaps once or twice a day. So we need to move towards those local users, some of which are not very efficient, such as blending, which may not make a lot of sense, but it helps at least in raising awareness, in promoting neutralizers. So I think that local demand will not have the biggest impact from a financial point of view if you compare it to large plants that produce ammonia for export, but they're critical for social legitimacy and for raising awareness amongst the population, and to then eventually move to a time to volume. But given that our countries have the resources, what we need to change is the structure, and that's why the state has a big role as a buyer. In Chile we have Chile Compra, which is Chile buys, and that has been a mechanism used to incentivize the purchase of several products. So, for example, electric cars in Chile don't have to pay for a circulation permit. Well, in the same way, you could think of different mechanisms in initial stages where the state, apart from providing the clearance and the authorizations, could help promote that increase in the demand. Yes, now we're talking about the Chilean state, but in general, the role of the state when it comes to procurement, to purchases, could be very interesting in how they could say, for instance, okay, I'm going to develop housing or schooling, but for this, I'm going to buy a greener concrete, or concrete that has a lower carbon footprint than current concrete supplies, and that will make concrete companies find a mechanism to try to reduce their carbon footprint. And of course you could have efficiency and electrification, but you could also find perhaps hydrogen. So having the state as an articulator for these purchases, these processes, and incentivizing green purchases, I think it's an ideal path to follow. And I think that it was very spot on when you said that the vast majority of business generation is going to be exports, but the social acceptance needs to happen locally, which is what Janina said, and this could be the result of these pilots that are more tangible, more accessible to the common population. So, João, in your experience, talking about opportunities, we talked about the electric gaps, the gaps in electric infrastructure. What opportunities do you see trying to make green hydrogen and its byproducts more viable? How could you do this by developing more electric infrastructure in Latin America? And if you feel like giving us an example, be my guest. Yes, of course. The first thing is that Latin America is at a very advanced point compared to different parts of the world, so we can use a cleaner energy mix to generate hydrogen in their very centralized systems, which is an advantage in countries like Uruguay, Costa Rica, Brazil, well, that we can leverage that. But even in those countries, it would be necessary to have more investment. And we're talking about an industry with large exports. So, of course, the first thing is the electricity sector, the electrical sector, and the development of renewable energies, whether it's wind power or PV, but also energy storage in order to optimize electrolyzers production. Also, offshore wind farms that could also play a huge role in Latin America. So it's about developing generation technologies that will become important, so that once that the system has a demand that is large enough for clean energy, that we can make that move. And of course, each country has their own needs and their own traits, but another infrastructure issue, leaving a bit of the electric sector, but also in terms of ports, infrastructure, also pipes, that some countries will have to, well, of course, invest. There is an issue that I would like to mention on this hydrogen produced that can be exported in different, in the shape of different carriers, for example ammonia, which is a great opportunity. But I think this is a chance for Latin American countries in general to produce in their local industries green products that have a high added value. The higher the better, whether it's internally, as we are discussing in a few examples, and also for export. Not just necessarily exporting a commodity, but, for example, green metal byproducts, fertilizers, and so on. And we think that developing energy industrial poles in Latin America could also be a differential once we have that clear differential, which is the potential of renewables and a cheaper energy. And we have some industries such as Chile mentioned, with all the mining industry, that can benefit from that, so that you get a product that has a very high added value in international markets.
Thank you very much, João. Yeah, and these products of high added value, you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned fertilizers. We are a region that focuses on agriculture, and most of the fertilizers come from abroad, and they are manufactured using natural gas. And there is something that we can replace. And we need to give the right incentives to the sector so that they can start with the replacement process. They can use pilot programs, but that is, I think, the way. And one more thing, not only because it's the kind of work that we do in PCR, but also to quantify these grants that are required. We worked a lot with simulations and with quantitative aspects. So in order to define that grant, that subsidy, we need to define those numbers through quantification and being able then to implement optimized policies. Claudia, how do we move on from the gap to the opportunity when it comes to training, inclusion, working with the communities immersed in these projects? Well, the same thing happened today in the morning. So Germany, as an importer of hydrogen, is a country that is interested in importing these, and we can also work on funding these projects. As I mentioned earlier today, we have training programs, and also we are providing funding for training sessions. And we also have longer and more complex programs, academic training sessions, and that is also another place in which the government can play an important role to work together with the academia so that we can implement training courses for the experts so that we can match those people with the job opportunities that are being created. And also to continue along the same lines, I do believe that if we have these business cases and many companies that see this opportunity and will create the offer for hydrogen and its byproducts, and I can also say that there's a lot of demand in your own countries, but also in Europe or in Asia. And being an economist, I don't know whether it's going to be in the short or in the midterm, but this demand and offer will meet each other in some place, and that will create new job opportunities. And something that we talked about in the morning that has a lot of potential is maritime transport, because the challenge of exporting hydrogen is transport and the high costs for Latin America to transport the byproducts to Europe and other countries. It's costly, and maybe in the long term, I don't know how competitive that could be compared to the exports of other countries that are closer to Europe. But maritime transport already buys those products in the country. Or an aircraft, for instance, that needs to go through refilling. In that case, they buy the products directly in the country where it is created. So there's another potential. There will be something in between import and export, because we have interested companies that are already investing, for instance, in the fleet of vessels that have new technologies. So they can use methanol or ammonia in the short term. They will have to buy and refill here and here. Then there's another opportunity. Thank you, Claudia. In all those aspects related to maritime transport, there's a huge potential. In fact, we are working with Panama, because since they have the channel, and they want to see whether when they go through the channel that helps the fleet to change their fuels. I don't know. We need to find a way around it and mechanisms to develop those incentives.
Passing to another topic, which has to do a little bit on how we work together through the multilaterals, but from this point of view on certification. What are you doing as EIA on the certification point of view, and how can we apply that to Latin America?
Yes, thank you. So why we are speaking about certification? Because we can observe the very early stage of a future international trade replacing, maybe in 2050, the existing trade of oil, gas, and coal. By what? By first critical materials. It will be the most important market for energy, lithium, copper. 50% of the energy trade will be critical material. And second, if everything is okay, hydrogen and derivative. for 30%. And the rest is remaining oil, gas, and the share and the importance of the trade will be lower than today. Today, I have not in mind the figure, but the trade, international trade of oil, gas, and the coal is very important. And if everything is okay for energy transition, the future energy trade will be maybe 40% less. So it's a frame, general frame, everything is okay. And for that, we need international rules, especially to put in place level playing field rules, because we need to have for the new, for example, in the World Trade Organization, we need to have fair rules in order that, for example, the country where you can export competitive products, not only hydrogen and derivative, but why not final products like steel, low carbon steel, etc. We'll need to put in place a new framework. And of course, in this landscape, the certification of hydrogen in terms of carbon content, but not only, maybe after we will speak about other sustainable criteria like and social criteria. But first, what we started in the last 3 years, and I speak not only for IEA but also for organizations like IPHE, which is another organization. With them we are working very closely. We started to define what is the methodology to calculate the carbon content. So there was a document on IPHE, and then for the certification, there is some existing scheme now in Europe, maybe in Latin America too, etc. And of course, we have to make coherent this system at the international level, because if Europe want to import something from Latin America, of course, the importer must trust what he is buying, because it could be very difficult if not, because we don't want to replace high carbon hydrogen by something we don't know the content of carbon. So at the international level, like for example my program, International Energy Agency, Hydrogen Collaboration Program, we work with IPHE to define and to put in place a platform for mutual recognition of certification scheme. So it's above the regional level, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. And the idea, and it will be confirmed at the COP28, because there will be a declaration of the countries saying that it's a high priority and we want to develop this recognition. But we will do the technical work, I will say, at the Hydrogen Technology Collaboration Program of IEA, plus IPHE and plus IRENA, I think so. So it's what we are doing now with experts from countries, and I have to say that in my organization, Hydrogen TCP, we have countries from 26 countries from different continents, except Latin America. So we hope to have soon 4 countries. We are discussing very closely with Uruguay, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil, and maybe Argentina. And we hope next year to have them on board, because I think it's very important to have. We have also Morocco as an African country, but it's not enough. We try to have a representative panel of the. Of course, we are not carrying out only this type of work in my organization, many other topics, but on this specific question, we have a specific group in order to, in 2-3 next years, to put in place a recognized platform to allow this international trade.
Thank you, Paul. I'll switch to Spanish. Con respecto
regarding these 4 countries that are part of your scheme, I think that is the best way to go to have representatives from Latin America and Africa, because we need to work all together, as you mentioned. Something else that I would like to add, and that was mentioned in the previous panel, we are working on a regional certification system that is paying attention to what is being carried out by the European Union and the Asian countries, more specifically Japan and Korea. Also work being done by the US and Australia. So we don't want to repeat the same things that they are doing, and we want to add to this Latin American effort for certification. And we would like to add 2 more attributes, something that we haven't seen so far. One would be relationship with native populations, something that was crucial for us in Latin America. And the other point could be water management, how to manage water resources in a region where water is very scarce in some countries. It's not the same if water is coming from an aquifer or from some other processes, or the use of waste waters. So those attributes are things that we would like to include. This is called CertiLac. And we would like to sign a declaration this week on Wednesday as part of the Energy Week. So I believe there's room for improvement so that we can work together, and we need to find mechanisms not only to certify hydrogen, but to look for certifications for green copper or greener steel, or just to go a little bit beyond that. Yeah, in that sense, that I think that more than certifying this, we need to pay attention to the standards. We have to harmonize these standards through the whole value chain. End uses will change, but standards for the country you're exporting to, those are the standards that are being used. And those are the ones that we need to take into account, and that is something you're working on. What about time? How are we doing? Okay, we have 2 minutes. Do you have any questions from the audience? Would you like to ask any questions to the panel? Come on, don't be shy. Okay, so if there are no questions, then well, in fact, I'm using these 2 minutes. I will ask each of you so that in 30 seconds to share a message with the audience. 30 seconds, okay? Paul, you start.
To underline the importance of international collaboration and to encourage Latin American countries to participate more to international organizations. So it's my main message.
Gracias. Claudia.
Thank you. Claudia, as we said today in the morning, Latin America has a great potential in energy issues. You have made great progress, and I think you are on the right track to use this potential that you have for green hydrogen and its derivatives. And from my company, we offer collaboration for those projects so that we can provide support to develop a sustainable market of green hydrogen. I think that we talked about many things. We all know that Latin America has a great potential, not only for producing molecules and export them, but also to create added value products. And this message that in a way is aligned to what I have told you before, we need to quantify these investment needs. We need to optimize them as much as possible so that we can have a better world for the next generations and an infrastructure that will create larger profits and more opportunities for the future.
Bueno, destacar.
I would like to highlight the role to be played by Latin America. Of all the projects that have been announced, 55 gigas by 2030 are coming from Latin America. 70 billion of those 320, 330 of the whole world. So we have a very important role to play. I don't know if it is about emissions. And then to share that message, the one I shared in Rio, Hans told us about time to market and time to volume, and I want to highlight the need to work together, and we need to be hopeful. And I was sharing a piece of news with Janina of the first vessel on the first corridor, green corridor in Europe, using ammonia. So that's happening right now. I think that we need to work hard so that we can make those projects a reality, and for that we need to reduce production cost as much as possible, to promote local demand, all the new uses. There are a lot of benefits, a lot of socio-economic benefits to this, including improving productivity, diversifying productivity of the countries, and that is basically the reskilling of people that may not have a job developed through fossil fuels. We need to make people aware of this so that they feel the need to provide support to this new kind of productions. So we have a great panel with clear ideas and opportunities, also gaps that we need to bridge. But at the end of the day, I think the most important one when talking about opportunities is that we need to work together so that we achieve these results. We cannot work in isolation. That applies to countries and multilateral organizations. Corporations cannot work in isolation. We need to work together. Consultancy companies, hydrogen associations, everyone should be working together. So thank you very much, and please join me in a round of applause for the panel.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to our moderator, our panelists, and you for coming. Now we have the coffee break.
Sí. Al salir,
Perfecto.